all of that research, all of the measurement has no meaning if you don't have something to measure. If you don't have leaders that are willing to bring together an effort such as the collective. And when you are able to have that leadership that is able over a couple years to bring together this plan, I think that's where transformation begins. So that's why through our whole journey of Philadelphia, the real standout of an opportunity for transformation is the collective. There are others, and they're in process, and applaud those. But the collective has a unique opportunity to make real change. And so I'm going to have the fun. Usually it's Sandra and Tayyib and Stephen who are asking us questions and getting us to go and do some research on things. But I'm turning the tide. I look forward to interviewing Sandra, Tayyib, and Stephen as he joins. So it's my pleasure to formally introduce the founders of the collective. These three people need no introduction, as they are known to so many. But as it is important, I'm going to just give a little bit of background for those who might just be joining on this section. Sandra Dungee Glenn, the founder and convener of the collective network, as well as the driver of the day-to-day progress of the overall collective brand. Sandra has served in executive level positions in community development, education, public policy, and electoral politics for over 40 years, obviously started at the age of 10. She is an experienced convener who brings diverse stakeholders together to attack multifaceted, interdisciplinary urban issues. And aside from that, she keeps the whole group straight. Stephen Sanders, who I know will be joining any minute. Well, I'll skip to Tayyib. Tayyib is the founder of the collective, one of the three founders of the collective, a principal at Little Giant Creative, as well as a partner at Smith & Roller Holdings, a real estate company that engages and invites diverse stakeholders of neighborhoods to become part of a growing, multicultural, and multi-socioeconomic tapestry. Tayyib is dedicated to cultural competency and the ability to engage multicultural audiences. Stephen Sanders is the chairman of the Collective Investment Group. Stephen is also the chairman of Beltraith Capital, which he formed in 2008 to execute his vision to provide solution-driven investment strategies, owned and incubated entities. Beltraith has a total of $1.8 billion in assets under management, and for over 30 years, Stephen has been fine-tuning his skills in the investment industry. I didn't cover the history of the experiences of Sandra, Tayyib, and Stephen, and I didn't cover the many boards that they all sit in and the breadth of influence that each of them have, because I think that will come up through the discussion, but also it's on their bios, and I think we should just get right into the transformational opportunity that we're all here to talk about. And maybe we could just start with, why are the three of you?
Got you.
There you are. Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
I just introduced you. I told the truth.
You always do, John. Thank you.
So I'm leading into the first question.
Okay.
Why are each of you so committed to Philly? And Sandra and her experience set could easily be in Washington, D.C., could easily be at Harrisburg, could easily be somewhere else. Tayyib, with his music, entrepreneurial, and then real estate, could easily be in LA, could easily be in Chicago, could easily be in Brooklyn. And Stephen, with you and your financial prowess, the capital for financial services is in New York. You could easily be in New York with your national investors, or in Chicago, or in Boston, where most major financial services are centered. Why are you all so committed to Philly? Why don't we start with you, Tayyib, because maybe you can wake us up. You're on mute.
That's unusual for Tayyib.
While we have him on mute, Stephen, let's.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I like that question, John, for a number of reasons. And when I think about it, yeah, you're right. Maybe some of that capital is starting to shift to Philadelphia. But
Testing one, two. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. But you're just gonna have to wait your turn.
All right.
That's okay. That was somebody trying to shut me down. But
And
I can't be stopped. But go on.
It can't be done. Yes, I'll be brief. But look, why am I committed to Philadelphia? I was born and raised in Philadelphia. After I graduated from college, Howard University, I worked elsewhere for several years, but I was driven to return back to Philadelphia for a couple of reasons. One, Philadelphia is home for me, and when Philadelphia loves you, it really does love you, and it's hard to not love it back. So as an entrepreneur, the city's creative DNA has always inspired me, and it continues to energize me. And as an investment professional, Philadelphia's location is very ideal. You mentioned New York and Boston, you mentioned Washington, D.C. I feel like we're right in that corridor of power, I call it, with Philadelphia. And it's always been very beneficial to be able to jump in the car or the train and just drive back or forth one way or the other. The other is that the talent pool in Philadelphia is really large. As an investment professional and an entrepreneur, I view it that way, and it's an invaluable asset to an asset management firm. So I just love being in Philadelphia, having access to everything that's needed to start, run, and build a business, and as an investment professional to be able to tap into the universities, the entrepreneur spirit that's here, and as well as all of the investment talent, which you'll get a chance to everybody get a chance to hear about more, later this afternoon.
Great, Stephen. Tayyib, we're doing this. Usually you go ladies first, but we're going with we're letting you jump in, Tayyib, in front of Sandra.
Well, we're also tearing down the patriarchy. So Sandra is the leader, so she will headline. But in all seriousness, you asked, why Philadelphia? I wouldn't be partners in a co-working space in Center City that overlooks City Hall if I hadn't chose to stay in Philadelphia. For more than 20 years, people encouraged me to move to Brooklyn. I was really close to moving to Miami maybe like 15 years ago. I've had multiple opportunities to move to LA, but Philadelphia is where my great-grandfather chose to, put his flag down in 1923. I got to spend the last 10 years of my mom's life with her. I got to, the studio I worked in when I worked for the Roots and Axis Music Group in the early 2000s was about 6 blocks from the housing co-op that my parents grew up in. The same neighborhood where I was from. And I had things like I was able to walk to my grandmother's house, for lunch sometimes. I got to, my dad still lives here. And to be frank, I've witnessed a lot of talented Black people be displaced from Philadelphia and not had their talents invested in here. And there's a frustration of upwardly mobile people when you systemically can't grow And Philly's a tough town, and I see people across industry and publishing and film, um, across sector who do very well in LA, in New York, in Miami, in Atlanta. Um, and it's a shame that we invest in bringing people to Philadelphia, but we can't invest in homegrown talent. So there's so many different things I could talk about my love for Philadelphia, but I'd also remind people that people like Nina Simone's family, moved to Philadelphia so she'd go to Curtis, and Curtis Institute a few blocks from my home, and she was denied access. Or John Coltrane moved to Philadelphia. Sun Ra moved to Philadelphia. Paul Robeson moved to Philadelphia. W.D. Du Bois did the first study of an anthropological urban environment in Philadelphia in this neighborhood. It doesn't get enough credit for that. So Philadelphia has always been what people called, I think in the 18th century, New Jeru or New Jerusalem. And that was a space where people had always lived free and prospered. But then we also have a city where the first public statue of an African American didn't come until 2016, but we have 2,400 statues or monuments to Ben Franklin. And we are still trying to release ourselves from the shackles of public policy that has frankly been anti-Black. And that's why the collective is rooted in a spirit of Black liberation, but also you can't be liberated in a capitalist society if you don't understand commerce. So I'm really fortunate to have mentors like Sandra, Stephen, and yourself. And I got to shout out our friend Ellen, who introduced us, last May. And I was engaged in the first convening by 17 Asset Management. And you and I have probably spoken more hours than people I've known for 10 years, through 3 uprisings, through, COVID. And I've got to get a sensibility of you and your team. And then that introduced us to other partners that made us stronger. And I've always joked to Sandra and Stephen and the members of the collective that this is Wu-Tang Financial. And people didn't get me in the beginning, but I think people understand that's where we are today.
I long to make a presentation where I tell institutional investors the name of the firm is Wu-Tang Investment Crew.
That's a trademark issue.
Never forget us.
I don't want to beef my brothers. That's a trademark.
As always, we hang on to all of your words, Tayyib, and learn.
Yes.
Sandra, please give us your perspective on why you're in Philadelphia.
Well, thanks, John. First, I'm thinking about rebranding us as the Wu-Tang Collective. That's not a bad tagline, Tayyib. We may want to go with that. But no, I'm happy to be here with you and with my partners who I've come to really, really appreciate as my brothers, John, and I'm adopting you along the way. And it's been a great year as we've been going along. I too am a native of Philadelphia, born and raised in West Philly. But it's funny you said, John, about being somewhere else, because when I finished college, I desperately wanted to be in Washington, D.C. This was, giving away my age. This was this was Carter before Reagan. So that tells you about how old I am. But, it was a time when a lot of things were going on in D.C. It was still Chocolate City, very exciting city to me. My background was in the whole area of environmental health. And so EPA was just getting started. So that was like a fascinating time. But I ended up getting my first job in Philadelphia, again, where I was born and raised. So I ended up starting my working life here in Philly. And my mom had a saying of bloom where you plant it. And so what began to happen was that as I was here, I got involved with Philadelphia. I was here when we were drafting the first Black mayor to run for Philadelphia, Wilson Good. And I was I was a volunteer knocking on door with the draft Wilson Good campaign. So I got involved in my neighborhood, and other young men and women were thinking about running for office. So I connected with people like Shaka Fatah and Vincent Hughes and John White Jr. and other folks around the city, that whole sort of like electoral milieu of the 1980s. And that was a time of a Black empowerment in terms of politics. I got very involved in that. So that helped me begin to reconnect with my neighborhood in a different way and see it in different eyes in terms of who was making decisions and who was really moving the city forward. What was housing policy, and why did it go one way and not another? So that got me to put my roots down even further. And so over time, I just ended up staying. I think one of the things that really turned my eyes toward the idea of being so passionate about what Philadelphia could look like is the years I spent on our school board. I served about 9 years as a member and then chair of our school reform commission and on our school board. And that gave me a chance to get all around this city and see the city through the lens of children. And the one thing about children, I don't care where they are or actually what race or color, is children love stability. Still, children love to know what they're a part of. And so understanding and beginning to feel the dismantling of neighborhoods and the transient nature of what so many of our children were undergoing really began to touch me about the cost of that. Because, it's my contention that many of the ills we talk about, whether you talk about violence, you talk about sort of this disconnection with compassion for each other, is people, when they're disrupted from their place and space, it causes all kinds of trauma. And I think before I really understood what it meant about place-based development and stability, I just kind of felt the importance of thinking about how we reset Philadelphia, particularly Black Philadelphia, Black communities, because they were seeing the most disruption. And so that, I think, really, by that time, I really had forgotten about going anywhere else. And now I'm very passionate, fully committed to seeing what we can do here to transform it and kind of create a different future for much of Philadelphia's population. And because we are at a crossroads, and it really feels that way. And it's just like, we just can't afford to lose ground. So that's a little bit of my backstory.
That's great. There's probably two audiences on this call: those who are from within Philadelphia, and then those who are outside of Philadelphia. I live 40 miles away, and there's no way ever in my lifetime I'll be able to say I'm within Philadelphia. I will always be a foreigner. I might as well be back in the Middle East, because I am not a Philadelphian and I'm an outsider. Speak to the ones who are not from Philadelphia about the Philadelphia opportunity, and speak to the investable rationale that investors should look at Philadelphia. And know that when you're speaking to that part of the audience, you're giving a narrative maybe that the other people from Philadelphia will join you in order to bring capital, more capital from outside. So as we look at the collective as an example, why do you all feel that Philadelphia is investable? And I've been with you all enough, so I'm happy for you all to reach out in the order or speak up or interrupt each other as you do every day.
So I'll jump in and just say that Philadelphia has an infrastructure that many parts of the world are trying to do large capital projects to reinterpolate. So we have great public transportation, we have great parks, we have middle-class neighborhoods that, as opposed to building ground up with parasitic capital, we could reimagine investing in Black home ownership, Black businesses, and close proximity to mass transit. All right, so historically, if you think about the benefits that created the 10x differential between white household wealth and Black household wealth, it was the public policy of the New Deal era, right? And within that public policy, there were all kinds of programs like the WPA, which created some of the largest or most popular artists of the 20th century, and it put people to work enjoying everything from photography to writing plays to actually construction projects or doing artwork within, public buildings that kept a portion of the creative class working and working to the good of collective, right? But still investing in society. Well, a large majority of those people were white identified people, right? And if we look at time, to be frank, whiteness is a man-made construct, and it's a moving pendulum. So like Italian Americans weren't white, Polish Americans weren't white. At one time, I think Benjamin Franklin really hated German immigrants in the Philadelphia region, right? Like, so how he spoke about German immigrants is how some people who are white identified today speak of our immigrant brothers in the 21st century, right? But to get back to why Philadelphia is important and investable, to combat that 10x differential, we're going to have to invest in Black and brown communities. And we have people who have been unseen, underinvested, and not thought of in an equitable, holistic way as actually citizens of the United States, right? So we have, let's say, the soil and the field with people with lived experience and best practices, that as opposed to having people be displaced out of Philadelphia to go take their fruits and, elsewhere, we can not just invest in the people who are homegrown, but we can also bring some people to Philadelphia with a lens for investing in Black capital projects, Black creativity, with a lived experience, a cultural competency, and an end goal of actually creating equity and opportunity to close those income gaps that were created by design. And one of the things that I like to call the grand gaslight is every generation we interact with white-led institutions, institutional capital, bureaucracy, academia, and we talk about, through DEI or diversity, inclusion, language, which had another language in a different time. How can we make white-led institutions feel or look better versus how do we take the shackles of public policy off of Black and brown communities so that we all can have a place in a functional society, right? In Philadelphia, I believe 30% of third graders read on grade level, right? How do you participate in the 21st century economy if you are functionally illiterate, right? How do we invest $35,000 to $50,000 in incarcerated someone for $13,000 in the city and $23,000 to $30,000 or even more if they go to private, if they're fortunate enough to go to private school, and then have them play in a so-called meritocratic, economy. So I think there's very deep, nuanced, intersectional changes that need to be invested in, but we also have to stop the cognitive dissonance to say that anything is fair in the modern economy if we're not investing, or doubling down on communities that have intergenerationally had oppression put on them through financial products.
Excellent.
So I want to pick up on something Tayyib said, and John, I am going to get to the question you raised, but something that Tayyib said brought to mind that one of the things that does have to change is something he said it very eloquently, but I will sum it up as calling it a value proposition. When you look at, and again, it's something I'm very sensitive to coming out of working in education in our schools, the children, it's amazing to me that when you think about the last century, the beginning of the last century to the first half of the last century, when we had millions of immigrants coming into this country, mainly from Europe at that time, and within one generation, they were acculturated to take their rightful place in this society, with overcoming language barriers and cultural differences and amalgamated into the American way. And yet we have the descendants of people who were enslaved, but who have been here for 300 plus years to learn the language, very clear about the culture. And yet when we bring those children into a setting of education, as you said, 2/3 of them are unable to function at what has been considered an acceptable level. Now, is that the failing of the child or the failing of the system? And I would argue it's the failing of the system, because when we look at those children, they're not seen as being valuable enough to prepare a place for in the growth of this economy. they're expendable. And I think we really have to confront that, because I think that's one of the things that through the collective that we are really being unapologetically about being unapologetically Black. We have to create the value for people who look like us to be seen as being intellectually competent, to being culturally competent, to having the technical skills to carry out the transformation, first and foremost, of the very communities that we come from. And so it is dealing with that mindset that doesn't put value on the places or the faces of Black Philadelphia. That has to change. But having said that, I do think the strength of Philadelphia is it's a tangible and the intangible. I think the tangible part, again, to something Tayyib alluded to, Philadelphia really is created around communities. There are green spaces, pocket parks all over this city that really create hubs for neighborhoods and communities. There are other cultural kind of settings that really bring people to gravitate, even in a large city, to feel like you're part of a small village. So whether you are in Cedar Park or Haddington or Hawthorne or Pulaski, you can name hundreds of neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And so they physically are the settings that you can rebuild around. And so the physical infrastructure is there. We have beautiful architecture, a variety of home types that can be reinvested in and don't all need to be replaced. So while we have available land, we have great structures to recapture and renovate and recreate. In addition to that, though, there's something about the Philadelphia, I don't know, what would you call ethos, that at one point, while we have the sophistication that rivals in New York, at the same time, there's a grittiness about us that's very real and hard to find someplace else. And I think that grittiness gives a stick-to-itiveness and a resilience that, despite all the challenges, what positions us well from a human side as well as a physical asset side for investments, that the people are poised to be invested in and grown, as well as the spaces. And I think that's a special and uniqueness about Philadelphia. That, along with the kinds of infrastructure that Tayyib spoke about, I think gives us a win-win situation.
Beautiful. Stephen, I know you're going to bring a more direct investment viewpoint, as you do.
That's what I'm charged to do, right? That's why Tayyib and Sandra wanted me to be a part of this, right? So, yes, it's, also look at it from, a couple of buzzwords. One is, location, which I talked about being right in the heart of that corridor where a lot of capital travels back and forth every day, up and down the East Coast. Number two, affordability. There's still, as Tayyib and Sandra mentioned, large pockets of land and neighborhoods that are extremely affordable and really actually poised for investment. So investors typically look for value in an investment, and the value is based on a valuation that says it has the ability to grow or have a decent return. And I think a lot of the neighborhoods in Philadelphia and a lot of the projects that we've looked at inside of the developers' portfolios actually demonstrate that type of value. And what that comes from is actually a collective action of the people that live in the neighborhoods, the businesses that surround the neighborhoods, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit. When you look at all of the institutions that we have in Philadelphia, they now recognize that their footprint creates value inside of neighborhoods as well, and they want to work well with the neighborhoods. Politicians understand that also, and so you've got this convergence of power and capital and people coming together with one voice that that says this is a good place to be. So Maybe unlike some cities that might be overbought or oversold, Philadelphia is still primed and ready, at least for the next 25 to 30 years, to be a good place for capital to come in and make money as well as make a difference and have an impact.
That's great. There are three really great perspectives on why to be driving capital to Philadelphia from those outside of Philadelphia. There's three tiers here that we are experiencing today. One is the developers and their products. Also, we're going to hear a little bit about get to know the investment team and the stage of that, and then the leadership behind it all, which is the three of you. It's been just so much fun getting to know the three of you. I feel like our weekly 2-hour meetings and then all the other meetings around them feel like it's around a dinner table, feel like it's among people I've known all my life. The pleasure of the diversity of you all. And I'm going to steal a word from Tayyib's partner in Little Giants, Megan Denenberg, neurodiversity. There's such great neurodiversity between the three of you founding partners. How did you come together? Is one question. And then how do you take advantage of your neurodiversity? Because great companies often are built by one person's vision. But companies that go the long distance are often built by a few partners that come together. And this is, in this case, the three of you bring three very different elements. So how did you come together? What's a backstory? And how are you different? And why is that valuable to the organization in the long run?
I will let this up and then defer to Ms. Sandra, but I would say that we all share a passion, share an end goal, but we might hit from different frequencies. So, you know, in culture and in music, there's a collaborative energy to playing music, and I have a certain chord, and that might be a hip hop chord, and I would say Pastor Stephen has a gospel chord, and Miss Sandra is like a gospel R&B, but I'll let her describe how we met.
I like that, Tayyib. I'll own that.
I'm traditional gospel. Okay, I'll take that.
But I have to stay with the gospel theme, because there's no way I'm going to deny that this is divinely ordered. And I say that with all seriousness, because just the alignment of things that have brought us together and bring us to here today aren't just, happenstance. So I will put that on the table, and people can take that as they may. But I'm an organizer by I guess nature, if you would. I'm kind of like a networker. I look at things and figure out how different pieces fit together. And I think that may be kind of what brought us together. I mentioned the my angst, if you would, kind of developing over the years about the direction Philadelphia was going in. And so seeing it from the education arena, I ran a nonprofit, I ran a charter school, I've worked for elected officials. So I've had a chance to be around and about Philadelphia at a variety of different levels. And so I watched the city as part of it was taken off. I mean, whether you're talking about physically downtown or the so-called gentrifying neighborhoods, the new energy and new young people kind of coming in greater numbers, and Philadelphia has experienced probably for a generation or so. And that was all very exciting. Restaurants were taking off, and being able to enjoy all that was great. But at the same time, for a variety of reasons, mainly around visiting schools, I spent a lot of time in my old neighborhood of West Philadelphia, where I grew up. I'm the daughter of a teacher and a pharmacist, and I talk about my father's drugstore. And I talk about the experience of having a dad and having a place that's where your name was up in big letters, Dungee's Pharmacy, and seeing that as a child and what impact that made. But I think about it really as an adult, when people came to me and talked about the impact that my father's store had on them as young people in the neighborhood who were influenced by this role model. And it made me think about what were losing in our neighborhoods, because when I went back to my old neighborhood and those old places, those stores were gone, all of them. None of those neighborhood businesses were there anymore. Many of the homes are falling into disrepair. Home ownership is down, a lot of rental going on. So the whole destabilization was going on. And again, that just bothered me. And it bothered me to the extent that I just was searching for, well, what do we do about it? I don't believe in sitting in problems. Really figured the thing is, what's the answer? What do we do? And to do something, even if not everything works. And so it was through that process, I was working at the time for State Senator Vincent Hughes, that I began to pay more attention to community development, the whole conversation around the federal opportunity zones, which were coming into Philadelphia or other places, or the potential for them. And just, wondering if this couldn't be an approach. Around the same time, I happened to read the Inquirer and saw an article about this crazy young man who had gone off on some people at a event and was telling off I think they were sort of like in the whole tech space, this African-American young man who was just calling folks out for not being genuine about diversity, not being genuine about equity. And I was like, who is this young guy? Because I liked what he was saying and what he stood for. And I was like, I want to meet him. And I found somebody who was a mutual friend. I said, you have to introduce me to this guy, young guy, Tayyib Smith. I just read about him. I've been trying to figure out this whole economic development thing. I just want to talk to him. And so we connected through a mutual friend. I invited him to an event my boss at the time was having. And so we just began to continue to dialogue, talk about what's wrong, what can we do, what do you see? And I was fascinated by his take on entrepreneurship. And he connected me with a whole different generation of young Black entrepreneurs that I wouldn't have had access to before. And so that just got me really motivated about figuring this thing out. And so we started doing what I call our little road show. We would just go around and start a meeting with folks, elected officials, and asking them about economic development and opportunity zones. And, we kind of found out that nobody really had any ideas about it. And, the other thing so we were still just kind of out there floating and talking. And then I remembered this other guy who I had met years ago, Steve Sanders, who knew about money. And Steve was all about money and investment and capital. And it's like, well, maybe we should talk to Steve and see what he knows. And so just kind of that was really what brought us together. We, I think, had a conference call, the three of us, about this whole thing about economic development in Philly. And just, out of that call said, well, why don't we talk to some Black folks who are doing development? And the idea of bringing in some developers into a room, literally November of 2019. And we ended up doing that. We brought the inaugural group of 7 developers into a room and said, guys, what do you see? We see the problem. We're thinking, there should be a strategy. What's going on with you? And that's really what was the birth of the collective. Because what we heard from them was this whole issue about access to capital. We heard their commitment to making change. We heard their commitment to community development, their desire to grow as companies, but the challenges and the barriers that they were facing. And so the idea of just continuing to convene and talk is really what kind of led us to where we are today. And then, Steve and Tayyib and I just I wouldn't let them go. I told them that they couldn't let go of my hands. And so we have just stayed connected and honestly, and really have formalized the relationship from there, John. And then meeting you last spring, and building out our relationship with 17 Asset Management is what really allowed us to take off. So, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
I'll just add in the mutual friend that Sandra mentioned was Donna Greenwood. And Donna also lived in the Friends Housing Co-op when she got her first apartment where I lived as a child. And we discovered that when she worked at Knight Foundation, and she used to invite me to events and have lunch with me. And then after she left Knight Foundation and went to the Education Fund, my business partner, Megan Denenberg, and I were fortunate enough to win 2 National Challenge Awards through Knight Foundation. And I think that just speaks to, the continual theme of community and, people bringing you into spaces or mentoring you or saying, hey, maybe you should take a look at this. And oddly enough, Stephen and I met probably about 15 years ago when I had a venture called 215. And my former business partner, who I ended up buying out, and I went to meet Stephen at the Radnor Hotel at 7:30 in the morning. And he did not invest in us, but him and I think, felt a certain kinship, and I have crossed paths with him over the years in different rooms. And then oddly enough, when we partnered up for the collective, there were colleagues of mine that I had no idea knew Stephen. And there was this energy, be like, Tayyib, how'd you connect to him? And, it just speaks to, sometimes it's where you are in your life cycle, but always having a relationship and maintaining a certain authenticity creates opportunity when all the partners are ready. Right? And I've learned, being fortunate enough to be partners across a couple ventures, that people invest in the team more than they do the idea. And sometimes the team has developed the idea and kind of get the whole group there. And I think that speaks to how we've had so much progress in less than a year.
And John, I'll just say I had no idea what I was getting into with these two. I showed up at a meeting that they invited me to, and it was a room, full of folks. And as Tayyib and Sandra said, there were a lot of cross relationships there. I bumped into a number of the developers that are now in the collective. I bumped into them individually, and they had talked to me about some of their capital needs over the years. And I had already developed a healthy respect for Sandra and Tayyib. With Sandra, her passion and vision and the mission around this was so pure and clear that it was hard to deny. And as she said, hard to get away from. And then with Tayyib, his energy and tenacity are contagious as well. So I had really had stepped over a number of years, had stepped away from being on a number of nonprofit boards. And as I was developing out my companies, I was continuing to look for ways where I could use what I have learned and the access to capital that I had to help others as well. And Sandra mentioned divine intervention. So, a prayer was answered when they asked me if I would be willing to help. I'm always willing to help people, but it's really different when you can help people that are clearly mission driven and where you can develop a relationship. Relationships matter quite a bit to me, and they had the right DNA and makeup, to say that, okay, I could pour some time into this and help out, because I believe that giving equals receiving. And when you do it the right way, God turns it into giving equals receiving to the 10th power. So spending time with Sandra and Tayyib and the collective has actually come back and helped me inside of my other businesses as well. And it's helping me become an even better leader, a better investor, and a better entrepreneur. So I thank them, and I thank God for giving me the opportunity to team up with them. And we've only just begun. And then, John, you stepped into onto the plate and to the scene, and we're just you and 17 Asset Management, a major force multiplier, helping us move from get quite a bit done with this $0 progress. So it's exciting. It's a great group of people, to work with. It's very, very refreshing, because you oftentimes don't find this in the investment management world.
That neurodiversity, that difference in the three of you is also matched by experience capabilities, different capabilities. And one thing that I think is really awesome about this is, Stephen, you bring that regulated background of SEC, from an RI, registered investment advisor, to FINRA in the broker-dealer world, and the compliance of putting structures, and through the many years of operating in a regulated environment, and also knowing how to talk to capital about products. And Sandra brings the mission and the clear direction of the purpose, and the leadership, and the commitment to purpose. And Tayyib brings both the activist behavior, which is so necessary to wake up so many people, to get them to learn, but also brings the experience as a developer, so as an end user and an entrepreneur. You would think you'd go out and look for those capabilities. You would recruit those and you bring them together and hope those people got along. What's amazing is you all got along first. And I've witnessed the trust and the commitment the three of you all have to each other. Then on top of that, both the neurodiversity and the skill set range. So I think it's just, I wanted to really spend some time on that because it's unique. It's unique in anything really that I've ever seen. And I feel very lucky just to be able to experience and on the journey with you. We talk a lot about transformation. Maybe that's a marketing word, or maybe it's real. And so the question is a collective, could it be transformational? We don't know, but I know, is there a bad, I'm getting really bad feedback.
I think, John, but I'll just.
Uh-oh. Sandra, looks like, oh, John's back.
Okay.
All right, it's much better.
So transformational. Let's use the structure. Tayyib, I think maybe you go on mute because you're the source of the feedback. Let's use the structure initially as a driver of potential transformation, and ask Sandra maybe to describe the collective network. Describe the collective network and what it is doing to add value and change. Then Stephen, maybe you to describe the collective investment group and how it drives potential transformation. And then when Tayyib, we get to Tayyib, and still a problem, Tayyib. It's not personal.
Can you hear me?
You and all of the in your room. But when it gets to Tayyib, it might be a browser. You might have to talk to the team. But it's causing an issue. When it gets to Tayyib, he can talk maybe on behalf of developers and what both sides means to them and the value. But what is the value you're looking to bring to the market, the value you're looking to bring to developers? And how does the collective network and the collective investment group, separately but together, create value? Maybe starting with you, Sandra.
So, John, I think it's important to point out that the network and the investment group are just two arms of the whole of the collective, and they are just a way to carry out the mission of the collective, and have value in that sense. But one does not exist without the other, if you would. The collective network is the membership and the advocacy and the convening arm of the enterprise. And so it is in the network that the developer members are participating. It is the network that hosts the meeting with, whether they're city council members or the economic development agencies, and is advocating and making the recommendations around what policy needs to change to support holistic development and to facilitate and accelerate the work of the Black developers. It's the collective network that is doing the research, aided by and supported, largely supported by 17 AM, that's laying out the measurement, the metrics that will be used to say, yes, here's what the impact is going to be from this investment. This real estate project is going to bring financial returns, but there are going to be measurable, what we're calling social impacts along with that. And so the network is helping to guide that work and lay that out. And finally, it is through the network and the convenings with 17 Asset Management as we go through this that will be defining what holistic development, social impact, transformation, what do those words mean? And so the case studies, the research will be coming out of the collective, the collective network. And so that is the arm that's going to be carrying out that work. And so I'll stop there and we can come back and kind of.
And could I just follow on question, Sandra?
Mm-hmm.
While they are within the same brand side by side, the collective network is a separate company, is a B Corp,
Yes.
and doesn't have any investment activity or control over what happens in the investment group. But it is able to support developers in other areas that maybe an investment firm wouldn't spend the time doing. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. Building the capacity of our existing developers and helping them think about their projects and think about them and thinking about how they build capacity to do larger projects, sharing with them national best practices. So kind of providing technical support to the developers, as well as keeping an eye to building the pipeline, because we have an inaugural group of developers, but the goal is really to build out a pipeline of new companies that are moving into the collective. And so that will be through the collective network. And so the members of the collective network will be putting forth projects that will be reviewed by the investment group. And a determination will have to be made about whether they meet the measurements that the investment group is putting together. So yes, but they are separate entities. The collective network is a public benefit corporation.
That's great. And Stephen, how does that differ than the investment, the collective investment group?
Yeah, the collective investment group is charged with building out an investment process and running that investment process to produce attractive returns for the capital that will come into the collective investment group to be put into the projects of the developers. When you look at any private equity firm, those that are most successful are the ones that actually have either hidden somewhere or quietly have a relationship with an organization like TCN. So TCN, we view as actually that's a collective network, and all the things that Sandra said that it does, that is actually a source of alpha generation inside of our returns. We need for the developers to be very effective and efficient business owners and entrepreneurs. And then we consistently need a pipeline of deals. Oftentimes what makes private equity real estate firms so challenged is that they don't have enough deals to put to work. So their rigorous process, like what we're developing, can cull through the deals and find the best of breed. So we're relying on TCN to make sure that those developers are very strong and they keep growing and finding deals and working closely with each other. So those best practices that a really successful developer finds, will be also utilized by the other developers, and that will flow directly into the returns. Now, we're not managing that part. We know that it's there, but we're managing the outcomes of all of the projects that we invest in, but they are influenced by that other part. And so I'm excited to have that kind of balance so everyone can stay in their lane and do what it is they do best in order to generate returns that investors are looking to receive. At the same time, we're having impact.
Right, that's so great. And Tayyib, from speaking maybe from the developer standpoint, what is the value that TCIG brings, and what is the value that the collective network brings? And then also speaking separately from a vision of what needs to happen, what are the ways that both of these entities can actually be transformational?
So thank you for that, John. A couple thoughts just to piggyback on what Stephen was speaking to. So African-American entrepreneurs and real estate developers are consistently caught in a catch-22. All right, so we're told that we don't have capacity, but we don't have access to the same networks of capital, but then we don't get the opportunity to be primes on development opportunities. We're supposed to come through a MBE or a WBE, a door for minority business, but without access to capital and without access to scalability, you don't have the ability to grow. All right, so as someone who I can say humbly, I haven't been in real estate as long as some people, but I'm fortunate that I partnered with people who are more experienced than me, and I have mentors who are experienced. So my first project was a commercial real estate development in Center City. For African-American entrepreneurs, usually your first real estate development might be, 1 or 2 units or a flip. You could spend a lifetime trying to get into commercial development at that stage. And to be frank, I Megan, Jacob, and I at Smith & Roller have projects that were impactful. They spoke to community. There were elements of Black entrepreneurship in the capital stack, and capital asset allocators would visit us from DC and New York, and they say, "Oh, this is cool." Oh, and we'd have dinner and lunch, and they'd be out, and I would be like, "What just happened here?" Like, they were very complimentary. And then you have people like Stephen, or I have other mentors like Ray Ramsey, who would bring it to my attention that we didn't have the capital asset size that would be appealing to a family office or a pension fund or a large asset allocator. So Paul said earlier that he's one family and they invest in projects of 10 million or more, right? So how do you go from flipping houses to having a project that can handle a $10 million investment with a 10-year hold partner, all right? With a flip transactional mentality. So through having conversations with Sandra and then convening some entrepreneurs who were at the $1.5 million deal to the $40 million deal, someone like an Anthony Miles or Leslie at Mosaic, or some of our projects at Smith & Roller that are 35 million or more, then you learn that there are people, and you don't learn this when you grow up, frankly, like I did, in proximity to poverty, right? There are people who eat off of the fees of capital, and the capital is a product, right? If you grow up poor, you never imagine that money is an actual product. And as African Americans who undergirded capitalism with our free labor, right, we're so dislocated from capital that sometimes you don't have anyone to teach you what capitalism is actually about. And that is money as a product moving, right? So once we posseed up collectively as 7 partners, we now have deal flow above 250 million, which then makes you more, it makes you sexier to large capital asset allocators in an age where for the first time, dare I say since Reconstruction, there's large asset allocators who have mandates to invest in Black and brown communities. And we also have, $1.8 trillion coming from the Biden administration to cities and states across the nation that also have mandates to invest in women, Black and brown communities, right? But only 1% of the wealth management firms in the country are black or have investment capital. You know, if only 2% of venture capital thus far has been dispersed to all people of color, women, and black people, right? So there are white men born in certain census tracts who have the ability to share information, share data, and disperse capital, fail with horrible ideas, and still make profits, right? So like, if we can't figure out how to double down and invest in communities that have, you know, frankly, been creating brilliance for generations, then we can't remove ourselves from the shackles of structural racism. And I think that's something that people oftentimes in the business space don't have the courage to say. And there's a disingenuous, you know, historical narrative about Black business, and not to turn this into, you know, too much of a rant, but in this around 68, the Nixon administration was very thoughtful when they changed Black power to Black capitalism. And then they took some upperly mobile strivers, right? And they put them within a narrative to put them in concert or in collaboration with corporate capital. But then they forgot the small businessman. And in the United States, $10 million or more annually is small business. It's really hard to find African-American entrepreneurs in the Philadelphia region who are reaching $1 million or more in annual revenue. I'm partners in 3 or 4 ventures, and only 2.3% of the businesses in the city of Philadelphia are Black owned, but we represent 43% of the city, and the city is 60% people of color or BIPOC. We have to be honest about structural racism. We have to be honest about intergenerational public policy that designed the inequality in our communities. And if we don't have the courage to step forward and make transformative change with that lens, then some people need to step aside and get on the right side of history or get out the way.
Excellent. That's the kind of learning that all investors need to hear. You know, my aha moments throughout this year of learning that at the abolition of slavery, there was 15% Black Americans that represented 0.5% of the wealth in America. And now, at the turn of the century in 2000, Black Americans, there was still, then it was 15% of the population. Today it's 14%, have 3% from 0.5% all that time later, which represents a number of around 15 to 16 trillion in the wealth gap. And with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking to make measurable intentional progress between now and 2030. What is the opportunity for the collective? What is in the best scenario? In your imagination, what is the success or scenario for success that the collective could reach between now and 2030? And maybe imagine a little with the hope with this effort is actually helping to transform that number, how it gets down to Philly, and how this effort that you all have created could be a part of changing and removing that wealth gap. What's a success scenario? What are the hopes? And I know these aren't in a business plan, but this is just imagining.
So, if anyone, Sandra, would you like to go? So, there is a normality that people have about access, a view of access, or a view of what a safe, walkable neighborhood that is, let's just say, cliche, the American dream. Right? It is not normal to think of that as a predominantly Black neighborhood, and that is a crime. Right? That's an intergenerational crime. A couple years ago, I had the benefit to be a part of a think tank at the University of Chicago with the Esther Gates. And I remember walking through Hyde Park one day, and I saw a little plaque. It was the Baskin Robbins where the Obamas had their first date. Right? And you walk a couple more blocks and you see the neighborhood where the Obamas own a house. And that's also where Oprah started her empire, right? That's also where, frankly, Louis Farrakhan lives. That's also where Jesse Jackson started his career. And the neighborhood looks like Rittenhouse, but it's a Black neighborhood, right? And then you go to the hotel and there's a Black hotel manager, right? And you go to the movie theater and there's a Black hotel manager. And you go to the restaurant and it's a predominantly middle-class Black audience of people. And for everything that I was reading that year about the violence in Chicago, it really started to hurt me that at 40-something years old, that's not something I'm familiar with in the United States. Right? So if we can't have a lens towards equity, right? And equity from the perspective it's really triggering for me to hear people talk about equity and inclusion with no Black people in the Capitol stack, right? Because equity means different things in different rooms, but oftentimes when people are talking about equity in regards to us, it's optical or rhetorical, right? It's not about actually creating wealth, opportunity, or health and wellness from a holistic perspective for Black and brown people. And that is something I'm passionate about and I'm unapologetic about demanding.
And the way I pick up on Tayyib's point, I sum it up with ownership, because to me, a lot of what he speaks about comes down to ownership. When you think about still the way that the vast majority of Americans come into wealth is through home ownership. Owning your home, that gives you the equity to send your child to school. It gives you the equity to start a business. It gives you the equity to be able to take care of your health if you have run into an emergency. And lacking that access to wealth or ownership has been one of the underpinnings and one of the failings about having any kind of economic foundation for Black America. And so to me, success for the collective is seeing an ownership number over 60% of home ownership and business ownership in the Black community. Because when you control the land and you control your space, that's power. Because, you have to be able to, not to take a war analogy, even though Tayyib tells me to read The Art of War often, that, the idea though, you have to launch from somewhere. And I mean that in a positive way, whether it's about peace or anything else. When you're grounded in a space and a place and stability, that's how families are built. That's how neighborhoods are sustained. Lacking that is when we see all of the incursions and the social challenges and ills that we see. So I peg it on ownership first. The second thing I would say is our success is a pipeline, and we're up to like 20 Black developers in Philadelphia. And they're able to do projects of $100 million plus. And, I'm not the one, I'm the one who's least from the financial background. So even $100 million is not a lot of money in this world, but it would be major growth for Black development companies. And when you talk about a joint venture, that's 2 or more Black companies coming together. And that out of that grows a whole ecosystem. The second principle of Kwanzaa is Kujichagulia, self-determination. And that's what I really think this is about. And that is not against anyone else or any other community, but I don't believe you can be true partners with anyone unless you're able to sustain yourself and determine your own destiny. So the idea of ownership, pipeline, and a Black ecosystem that can support economic development. And if we can be a strong anchor for that through real estate, that would be success.
Excellent. Stephen?
I like all of those, and I would say, so we're looking out. It's 2030, you said, and we're looking back, and so now we're on the TCIG is on its 5th fund. All of the initial investors have re-upped with us at least 3 or 4 times. We are well north of 750 million in assets, and probably closer to $1 billion. The returns that we've produced for investors have exceeded their expectations financially, and they are joyful, happy, and glad about the impact returns that have taken place as well. And then net, we're having an event like this, and there are communities all across the U.S. that have tapped into what we have been blessed to develop and grow and form to replicate what we have done, and it's being replicated across the country to make change and have impact in a positive way. So Philly has attracted 1 billion, but this whole concept has attracted tens of billions, and it's helped millions of people change their lives.
And why would we not want this to happen? I mean, what's getting in the way? And I'm asking myself this question, and I'm asking any other. Sorry,
John, you know what it is. Just say it. Say it with me. Just say, say structural racism. Just say it one more time.
Why would we not? Other white people, why would we not want the powerful Black neighborhoods to exist? Why would we not want wealth to be created in these amazing neighborhoods that possess so much history, so much culture, so much wealth in humanity? Why would we want anything other than that? And why would the children of wealth advisors at every major institution not be able to have a discussion with their parents on what are we doing about this, mom and dad? And when those mom and dads talk to their advisor, why would those financial institutions not have the capability of driving capital to the work that you all are doing? That is a human issue, a human design issue that we have the opportunity of changing with a collective. I am so just grateful for the passion that the three of you all have, the diversity, the stewardship, commitment to the developers, commitment to the communities. We'll give all of our listeners a point to get a sandwich. We're going to come back and start to dig in to learning from the same thing from the developers on their purpose, their capabilities, their expertise, and projects that they're working on. And we also ask all of our listeners to help us with your thinking, with access to the right investors, access to the best thinking that you would like to bring forward as you as you go through the second half of the day. And as we go through the developers, we'll then hear from the team that has come together to execute on this. And I think we'll have a great few hours ahead of us. But Sandra, Tayyib, Stephen, thank you for everything you do and who you are.
John,
Thank you, John.
John, also, I want to thank you because you really have been a partner with us throughout this. Ever since I first introduced you to Sandra and Stephen, you've been riding with us stronger than, I'll say, frankly, some people I've known in the city and region who talk it, but they don't walk it. So I'm proud to call you a partner.
Absolutely. We echo that. Thank you, John. Thank you, guys.
All of the 17 team, is all having a little tear in their corner of their eye because of your kind words. But I know we say this every time we all meet, so I know we feel it. But it's nice to share it with everyone.
Yes,
okay.
Thanks.
We'll